Next speaker is from Justice Africa and Care International, and there is none other than Benjamin Ochieng and Edith Kabesiime. If they are here, they can come in front. Please, Benjamin. Let's clap for him as he comes. Yes, it's all right. It's okay. Your Martin is giving some space, and the good thing they're all from Southern Sudan, the Republic of Southern Sudan. So please, Benjamin, who is first? I take Benjamin, Edith. Okay, Edith.
Good afternoon. I know this is perhaps going to be a difficult presentation, but we'll try our best. My name is Edith, as I've been introduced, Edith Kabesiime. I work for Care International, and we are collaborating with the Justice Africa on trying to understand the renewable energy aspects in Southern Sudan, but also, of course, looking also at the energy sector, including oil and gas, generally, and how the two can contribute to sustainable development. So in this presentation, I'll give the first part. My colleague Benjamin will give the middle part, and then I will conclude. Let's reflect on when we talk about sustainable development, what it means. It's of course eating as we leave something for the future generations so that they are also able to meet their needs while perhaps we are long gone. That is a definition, I think, which is generally accepted and internationally recognized at the global level. Let's also reflect. We know economies in Africa and perhaps elsewhere in the world depend on natural resources. But we also know that currently natural resource governance is one of the global debates going on, and there are several implications, especially for countries in Africa, when we reflect about our governance regimes. But we also know that weak governments are certainly capable of investing in sustainable development or putting in place mechanisms that are accountable and transparent to really ensure that petroleum and other resources, natural resources, fuel development. But we also know that because of the earlier point, we know that where there is poor governance, then we have limited involvement of stakeholders. And of course that has it has a cost of all those issues, whereby you find that really economic objectives and business objectives fail to reconcile. And then at the end of the day, we see all these complications that we experience in most countries in Africa. And of course, our region not being an exception. We also know that if you hear from the previous speakers, especially from government, they've talked about weak government institutions, lack of capacities, policies that are not implemented, lack of infrastructures, poor accountability issues. So all those at the end of the day really impact on whether we can or cannot achieve sustainable development. Therefore, the last point down kind of points at the fact that whereas Africa and of course our region is rich in terms of natural resources, still we're a region that still ranks high in terms of poverty, while actually we have this potential that can fuel our development. So therefore, let's see how do we dissect our understanding of both our individual and collective roles in advancing sustainable development. First of all, as individuals, but also collectively within our constituencies. Again in the morning, and I think yesterday many of us, the presenters, talked about the need for us to forge partnerships, the need for us to work together, but at the end of the day, harmonization of roles, expectations, interests, positions, needs, wants, is really what will drive us to achieve sustainable development. What is the role of government as one of the stakeholders in ensuring that we achieve sustainable development in the context of oil and gas, but also other aspects of regimes of natural resources? Is government supposed to be a steward? And if so, how have we played that role? Because we've seen in many cases, whereas, for instance, the Constitution will say government holds this resource in trust of the people of Uganda or the people of Southern Sudan, but at the end of the day, we see the reverse. That stewardship role is sometimes not effectively played. Is government, of course we know government is responsible for policy formulation and implementation. I want to use an example of Uganda, which is really good at having very smart policies. But if we reflect, to what extent have we effectively implemented those policies to deliver sustainable development? Of course, many of us who live here, we know what people say, and we have a slogan that we make the good policies here. I think they go to Tanzania, I don't know what happens to them, then they go to Kenya, they grow from there, and then they're implemented in Sudan, in Rwanda. So there is an issue around policies whereby we need to reflect and ask ourselves whether, as governments, we are playing a role of course, making sure we have good policies, but then implementing them effectively to deliver development impacts. Are there incentives, both provided by government but also by other players, that can really drive this sector, fuel development? But also, what are the barriers that as government and other stakeholders that we need to deal with in order to really break out of the cycle of poverty? What about technology? What is the role of government, but also the role of other players in ensuring that there is technology development, there is diffusion? I know there are all sorts of issues around the technology. There are issues of property rights and the intellectual property rights and the rest. But how can we break those barriers so that Africa is able to access such technology that can really fuel development? And of course, there are issues around tax, import duties, and the rest, which all these compound some of the problems that we have, that even when we are resource rich, we are really still struggling to break the cycle of poverty in Africa. What is the role of the companies? Of course, since yesterday and today we are talking about the role of the industry, the players themselves. What is their role in shaping or contributing to national and local development? We have seen some companies, of course, they'll come, they are bringing the monies, they are trying also to invest in social infrastructure, in social development initiatives, the so-called corporate social responsibility. But is it organized in a way, and is it addressing the needs of the people? Because at the end of the day, when we talk about sustainable development, we are talking about people being able to live a dignified life and being able to really go beyond living at the base level. And then what is the role of communities? Of course, we know communities, they can be resource owners, but they can also be collaborators in ensuring that developments in oil and gas and other energy subsectors flourish. We also talked about the role of civil society. I don't want to repeat that yes, whereas civil society can play a role in terms of complementing government in delivering social development to communities where these resources are hosted. At the same time, civil society plays a big role of really being a watchdog and holding other stakeholders accountable. Because as we know, if civil society doesn't speak for the voiceless, as Honorable Minister from Sudan said, then who is going to speak for them on some of the controversial issues? And of course, course, we know sometimes we can't sit, it's a difficult balance, being friends with the oil companies, being friends with government, but also at the same time, being friends with citizens, so that we find a balance where civil society really plays that role of holding government and the private sector accountable so that they deliver what is really right to the communities. As I said in the introduction, I said that natural resources is kind of the engine for development in Africa and perhaps in most developing countries. We all know that perhaps poor countries tend to be at the same time the lowest in terms of energy consumption per capita. So generally energy is central to development. So if we do not wisely invest in energy, of which petroleum is one of those energy resources, then I think we are undermining our own development, because as we were saying, energy is central, and there is very strong evidence to show that. But we also know that governments are seeking to invest in this sector, of course with the aim of creating employment, adding value, their local products from our infrastructure and all that. But what extent are we doing that? Because we know in most countries which are resource rich, especially oil rich, they tend to be swayed away from investing in other subsectors and focus more on oil, not knowing that actually oil is a finite resource and at some point it will run out and the other sectors will remain the most important to drive development in the long term. So therefore, can we use petroleum to invest in other sectors in order for us to reinforce development? But we also know that governments are facing challenges when it comes to really looking at other alternatives besides oil and gas. Do they have the right, do we have the right technical capacity? Of course, my colleague from NEMA and the Uganda Wildlife Authority, they have hinted on that. In UA, we see they are doing a lot to capacitate their staff. In the Ministry of Water and Environment, I remember Teddy mentioned that the capacity is an issue. And then we also have issues of chronic instability in our region. We also know that, all the way from Burundi up to South Sudan and even beyond the Horn of Africa. We have those issues. And we are kind of one like ecosystem that instability in Sudan will spark instability in the other countries. It may not be political instability, but it could also cause, it causes economic instability, it causes social instability, and all that. And of course, once you have instability in all those aspects of development, then you can hardly talk about sustainable development. Then there is the high interest rates, especially in financing most of the energy projects in Africa. And I want to quote recently what our president said recently when he was in London at the Sustainable Development Summit, where he said that actually that the problem we have is that private companies tend to borrow money, and that borrowed money usually comes with high interest, and at the end of the day that high interest is built into electricity tariffs. Therefore we end up with expensive electricity, which at the end of the day affects how many of us can access electricity. Certainly that is a valid point, but then you can see the mismatch between perhaps our leaders and the private sector sometimes. And that gentleman as well says Uganda's president would have to rethink his model, or he's not going to have the electricity. You see the mismatch. Okay? The private sector is saying this, the president is saying this, and the private sector is saying the other one. So how do we achieve sustainable development if we have the minds are diverging, the opinions are diverging? I want to close there with that, at that point, and ask my colleague to take on from there, and then I'll come back to conclude shortly.
Thank you, Edith. I'm going to be super quick as the enzymes are striking already. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to pick from where Edith left to speak about how we can acquire loans that don't harm future generations. Apparently, the whole East African region is pursuing massive infrastructure projects, including energy, and it's important that the process and the pursuit for these projects should be discussed in certain platforms to generate academic opinion and civil society opinions. This is crucial because we don't want to imprison the future generations. I think my colleague there was talking about how President Museveni is trying to eliminate the middlemen. I think the middlemen are all over now in Africa, and they contribute to the increase in the prices of projects by over 30%. Sometimes this is also their overheads, but sometimes it is commissions. But sometimes it's not easy to do away with middlemen, especially for South Sudan. You will still get a lot of middlemen coming as investors, and by the time you see the actual cost of a project, it would have gone so high. But the implication is that this all goes to the future generation. You're borrowing loans at high interest rates. And besides that, we want to talk about how we guarantee the quality of those projects. I think the president in Uganda also has learned big lessons from Kira Dam and Bujagali, whether those are really were good political decisions or there was some technical mistakes which were made, and it is going to cost the country a lot of resources in future. So again, also, yeah, we talk about transparency in financing these projects, including procurement processes. It should be very open, and it should not be hurried. I think Karama almost failed to take off at one moment because of procurement issues. Those are some of the things that we want to discuss in the future and extend opportunity for a lot of people and platforms so that we have ideas on how we can move on with this very expensive project. Again, normally resource-rich countries become so liquid, just like South Sudan. South Sudan is a liquid state. It's moving, it's facing challenges, including the current conflict and something like that. How to move on from there in terms of creating a wealthy economy is going to be a challenge, but it requires a lot of work from both development partners and the South Sudanese themselves. Liquid leads to temptation, like everybody knows that. It has happened not only in South Sudan, even in Uganda sometimes. You've seen MPs get certain monies. Their areas are paid or loans are paid straight away from some accounts. That is being liquid. That's what can lead to buying political patronage, and can lead to rent-seeking, or that's rent-seeking conflict, such as in South Sudan. There's already characteristics of rent-seeking conflict, and also maybe kleptocracy. So again, the impacts of investing in this sector, in the oil sector also, we've also seen in Uganda currently that the shilling depreciation is partly attributed to high investments in the oil sector. So according to one African economist, he's saying the country's current deficit is expected to stand at 14.8% in 2014, up from 10.9% in 2012. This is due to modest growth in exports against high import bills, mainly from imports of capital goods for major investment projects in the oil and gas sector. So if this is going to be the trend in Uganda, then most likely we shall have taken the case of probably Nigeria or the old Sudan and something like that. So these are the observations that we should be making now, and see how we can discuss and to see how we can balance the economy, because the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Suruma, also warned about this some time back. Said Uganda it risks losing its agricultural power in the region at the cost of what? Investments in the oil sector. So again, also in Kenya, you've seen what's happening. What will be the impact of the oil business there on the tourism and the flower industry, which was so beautiful, and the rest. So again, let me come to lessons and experiences. Here we have talked about this is a platform from experience sharing, which is very good. I've learned a lot of things, and I'm happy to note that South Sudan has also learned from within itself, according to the Honorable Minister's presentation. And Kenya and Uganda and the rest should also learn from South Sudan. Actually, I'm hoping that next forum, NPA should probably take people from the region to visit the oil fields in South Sudan and be a practical kind of learning experience. And the same also, South Sudan also should join us and probably visit the Hoima, the fields in Hoima and the rest, so that we get practical and we go beyond the conference level. So these lessons are very crucial because also South Sudan has potential new fields, and it can have very good lessons from Uganda and also Kenya. So this is very important, and also in strengthening our regional collaboration. So how do we seize opportunities? This is probably how to move on. Of course, Edith also talked about strategic partnership with institutions. What we want to know is, can nations attract investments that permit countries to create regional networks that build peace and intra and international commerce and prosperity, as well as support green growth? Are national development plans able to adopt green growth strategies with priorities on electrification and sustainable biomass consumption in a bid to expand water access for families, for agriculture, improve forestry and fisheries? Can resource-reliant nations such as South Sudan take advantage of increasing revenue from their fossil resources, as well as international investment to fund projects that support their communities to become champions of low carbon emissions, pro-community and pro-job creation? Those are the discussions. So I want to end here by also at the global level, what opportunities are we starting to see? In 2012, we have the UN General Assembly launching the Sustainable Energy for All, it's called SEFA, with the goal of securing by 2030 universal access to electricity and safe household fuels, and a double rate of improvement of energy efficiency, and a double share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. This is a great opportunity, especially in the context of South Sudan, because we are talking about safe household fuels. Most of us know, you've been to Cuba, we sometimes refer it to as generator city, diesel generator city. They're like, I don't know, 10,000 generators they are running at the same time. So sometimes that's not healthy, it's not going to be healthy. We need to tap in opportunities that can mitigate that. But again, taking back to Agenda 21, which is a non-binding and voluntary implemented action plan of the UN with regard to sustainable development. This is a product of the UN Conference on Environment and Development held in Janeiro in 1992. So it's action agenda for the UN and other multi-organizations and individual governments around the world that can be executed at local, national, and global. So Agenda 21 means the 21st century, how we should do things in a sustainable manner in the 21st century. And I won't go into details of this, but you could just look, more opportunities are there. We have emerging green markets, innovative financial instruments, essential infrastructure institutions assisting drivers of green investments. And finally, Edith will just wrap up with these final opportunities, then we can break off another 2 minutes if permitted. Thank you.
Another one.
Which can make it quick.
Yeah, so zooming into Southern Sudan, I think there is a great potential for South Sudan to move away from petroleum-based economy to really invest in other types of renewables. For instance, that is, for instance, hydro. But of course, the list is long. We have wind, we have biomass, we have all sorts of other renewable resources that actually Southern Sudan could invest in as one of the ways to diversify its energy source. I've already mentioned all that. That's all that really can be looked into in order to move away really from the petroleum. But of course it applies to other East African countries. At the end of the day, it is a choice which we must make. We can decide to choose the resource curse. Most of you have read about that. But we can also choose sustainable development, whereby we take the sustainable development path. And I want to jump to the last bullet, which says that key to this sustainable development path is strong commitment to the rule of law, sustainable resource stewardship, focus on equity for the different stakeholders, including ethnic groups, but also effort to raise the standard of living and foster local economic innovation and growth. And certainly that ties with my first slide, which was talking about, which gave the definition of what sustainable development is about. Unless we have those ingredients in the last bullet, then that path can really be very difficult, and we end up taking the first path. I would like to end here.
Thank you so much.